you want me to like give a framework for how I can demonstrate or like how I demonstrate an objective morality?
Yes, please.
Right, because like I was just like explaining why I value objective morality, but like yeah, I can give my framework. So basically, look at like the law of non-contradiction, right? Or the law of identity. Like those are like intrinsic metaphysical concepts. Like God, like a transcendental being like God, like even he has to submit to the law of non-contradiction. For example, God, there cannot be something above God because God is all-knowing and all-powerful. It contradicts the very essence of God. Like it's a almost like it's an unbeatable like law that's intrinsic within the universe, the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and so forth. So we know that there are concepts that exist with a transcendental character because like there's a sort of way to understand that no conceivable concept that you can develop can contradict those very notions and those very ideals. And I think you can utilize the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction and so forth to build an ethical framework as to how we should govern our behavior and how we should govern our conduct and so forth. And I assume it's objectivity, the same reason why we objectively value reason when we're engaging in inductive scientific research. This is an argument that some deontologists, including myself, adhere to, which is the argument of the guilt in companion argument. So if you reject objective morality, how can you why do you not reject like reason as a concept? Because like reason, like I can subjectively say I don't care about reason. Okay, like this is the problem I have with Vosh's ethical system, his rejection of epistemological like truth. Like Vosh cannot tell a Holocaust denier that he's objectively wrong because that Holocaust denier could just say reject truth as a concept. Like I don't value that. We generally tend to assume like we take some epistemological concepts for granted. Like we assume truth should be valued because it seems like an obvious axiomatic claim to make. But if you reject truth or if you reject epistemology and its objectivity, I don't think you can really function as human beings. And I think in that same token, why reject objective morality when we value other things which cannot be materially established would be my question.
Well, simply because I don't think that there are specific values that every sentient being or like every human being has. I just think that we intrinsically value values, and we all have like different configurations of those. And usually what that is it's heavily influenced by the societal context that we are raised in and the ideology that we're inculcated within. So it's sort of like my perspective on it is basically like we're given these codes and we're told that they're objective simply as a measure of controlling us.
Okay, yeah. So I think that a controlling ethical system, like one that tries to subordinate or like coerce people, like I think that I reject that because I operate with a very Hegelian ethical framework. But like I don't believe in like, I think that freedom is an end in and of itself in terms of our ethical progression and development. I think that I agree that there is the superstructure that exists which promotes certain ethical frameworks to control people and to subjugate people. But I think negation of oh sorry, my Discord notifications are going crazy. Um, all right. So I I agree with you that we do need to reject, ethical systems that can't justify themselves and seem like they just exist to, coerce people and like subordinate people. But I do believe that, like a clock, for example, like we say the clock ought to, do X, it ought to tell the time. From a naturalist perspective, we say a tree ought to grow and provide, you know, oxygen for human beings. Like there's intrinsic ought functions to characters, and I know this might seem like an appeal to naturalism, but a part of the Hegelian philosophy is that these are sort of these physical representations are part of a broader like they serve a broader function, and they like serve like these meta processes. They're not just physical oriented objects. And I think as human beings, our function is to be free and as to flourish as much as possible, because morality is a term, like it's not just this abstract, definable concept. Like we can define morality as, when you look at the roots of the term, I think it's ethicos and so forth. And what it means is essentially like, what is the good life? Introspection about what is the good life, reflecting on that. Like that's the origin and like the genesis of the term morality. And I think that you can like understand the function of morality and from that derive an ought claim. And I justify that ought claim because if we reject all metaphysical concepts because they're not falsifiable, then we live in a chaotic sort of dystopia, I almost want to say. So
Okay, so I see the value that you see in like having a objective framework because it's like convenient and because it serves what we would consider positive like social ends. But I don't, my issue is like when it comes to the idea of it literally being objective, because it just doesn't seem like it just like when people say something is good or something is bad, I don't, to me that just seems like a subjective observation, like it has to be, instead of like a objective claim.
all right, I see where you're coming from here. So like, do you believe that truth is like a self-justifying act? Like you can't negate truth, right? As a concept.
Well, what do you mean by what concept of truth?
Like in order to negate truth itself, you're gonna have to contradict yourself, because like me saying I reject truth, like that's a truth statement. So like you run into this contradiction, right? So like, do you think like truth like itself like intrinsically is something that is objective, and like, you can like substantiate, like if you like put out a piece of paper, you can substantiate why truth is intrinsically valid.
Well, I could probably create a concept of truth, but like different people believe different things are true, and then like it's you know what I mean? Like it's all kind of like there would need to be things that like literally every single subject agrees with for me to say, okay, this gets the validation of it being an objective thing.
This is a very common argument that you have in philosophical circles. The argument that how can there be like the ability to quantify an objective morality when people have different opinions, right? Like a certain culture might say female genital mutilation is okay, another culture might not. One culture might say, tax the rich. Another culture might say that's immoral. So I get that, but I think it's somewhat of a non sequitur in the sense that like two plus two equals four. Like somebody might say two plus two equals five, but like just because there's a disagreement about a math problem or like about something that's objectively like falsifiable or whatever doesn't mean there can't be an objective truth. Like just because X disagrees with Y doesn't mean there can't be an objective, you know, truth that we can come to a conclusion to using, a particular like epistemic methodology or whatever.
I'm very hesitant to accept that.
Are you like a complete like epistemic anti-realist? Like you don't even think anything can be objectively grounded. Like is that your um framework of analysis?
I trend towards that direction, but like when I look at society and I have my like takes on things, it's from a very like not in the technical like literary sense, but it's very like deconstructive. Like I'm trying to expose the fact that like society is basically built upon a bunch of myths that like reify it. Like it's like a position of negation of things. That's like the approach that I take. So it's hard to
So
think
very like
on this level simply because I don't like I'm not interested in building a analytical framework to objectively quote unquote like quantify questions. Like I just you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying?
yeah, I totally get like you're more of a delusion, so I can see why you're more like of a deconstructionist rather than somebody who's trying to, you know, like demonstrate an objective ethical framework to operate under. But like the way I see it, you know, if we can understand that 2 + 2 = 4, like even if like no matter exists, like it's almost a metaphysical concept in the sense that you can empty out the entire universe, like completely blank, and still conceptually, you know, if two things suddenly pop out and there's another two things, there doesn't need to be a consciousness to know, you know, they add up and make four. Like
But
it's like an objective metaphysical reality. I
But
think that can
wait, but
too.
doesn't there? Because like the concepts of the numbers 2 and 4 were human inventions to explain the phenomenon of there being what we call two things and four things. So there has to be the language to say it, and there has to be the conceptual uh, ground to actually say that. Even if, like, I think that our human ideas and concepts we use to interpret things are different things than the things in reality that we're actually looking at.
Okay, so here's so I agree with you from a linguistic perspective. Like all terminology is subjective in the sense that it's human constructed. Like, you know, the term sex is a social construct because it's a human made term. Colors, pink, purple, whatever, it's a human construct. So on a linguistic level, I agree. Like that terminology, two and two, is a social construct if you deconstruct it. But it I don't think the two and the two is what's relevant. Like I don't think the linguistic component is what's relevant. I think what it describes, like the concepts it describes that we can visually recognize and understand. I think that there's a sort of level of objectivity to it. For example, if no human beings existed, like, you know, the earth was empty, you know, there's trees, there's so forth, like there's still going to be those same objects on the earth. We just aren't there. Like we aren't there to descriptively explain it with the terminology we have, but that doesn't change the concrete nature of that reality. So like I agree with you like in the technical sense of the terminology and the sort of linguistic deconstruction, but I think that it doesn't negate a sort of broader, you know, metaphysical description that is independent of human consciousness, essentially.
I don't. I As long as you're not saying that the like the concepts that we create out of the reality that we observe as humans exist outside of us, like in the thing itself, because I don't agree with that.
Okay, so I agree with you. I agree with you that. Okay, could you restate your statement so I can like better understand it?
Well, like for an example, like um just like the numbers, like if you have like two of something, like what we would call that, I wouldn't say that our concept of there being two things exists independent of us. I think it's just very inculcated subjective truth. I don't think that it's like a objective thing.
Okay, so like if there's two pencils on my desk, okay, or like two pencils on your desk or whatever, you think that like that is purely a conscious sort of construct, like the intrinsic, you know, existence of those entities.
Well, what I think is like you need a concept of there being two things in order for you to recognize that there are two things there, or else
Okay.
you could yeah.
So like that, yeah, I think my previous point essentially acknowledges your point. Like, yeah, I agree with you on the linguistic descriptive context. Like obviously linguistics is not an, thing that exists independent of human beings, like the way we describe things. But I think that physical objects in and of themselves serve a particular function in the development and the progression of time. And for example, like it's like the Hegelian concept, where as you develop, you reach absolute knowledge when you realize that everything external to you is unified with you. Like it's a reflective of who you are as an individual. The unity of seeming opposite. I think those Hegelian concepts are like intrinsic, like they're part of the human development and the steps and movements forward. If you know what I'm saying.
Okay. Do you want to go more into those or?
Yeah, sure. Do you have like any particular skepticism of what I'm saying in terms of like intrinsic, like things intrinsically serve end goal? Like do you disagree with like that premise that I'm operating with?
I think certain things could intrinsically serve an end goal. I just don't think that any sort of value judgment upon it is like objectively uh, available.